My name is Gerald Hickson. I currently serve as Assistant Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine and direct our risk prevention efforts. I also have the privilege of serving as a member of the Board of Directors of the National Patient Safety Foundation. I want to thank you for your interest in patient safety, and I want to talk about the challenge of balancing systems and individual accountability in a safety culture. It's really important for us to understand that for years we focused too much on the individual, and then we have spent a lot of time understanding how it is that unsafe systems place humans in circumstances where we have adverse outcomes. But we also have a duty to address the challenge of individuals who behave in ways that do not promote teamwork. And so what organizations have to have is a balanced approach to this great challenge. Now, when we talk about a safety culture, embedded in that is this notion of fair culture, just culture. And you'll find some excellent articles to review by Frankel, by Marx, and I'm going to encourage you to look at that. But when I talk about this concept of safety culture, I mean a place where individuals understand that the organization is going to look both at systems and individuals. And when we do find circumstances where individuals have failed to deliver the best performance, that we are going to deal with them in a predictable way that is designed to return them to full and honored members of the team. But in talking through this challenge, I'd like to use a case. So let's say you're a medical leader and you receive one of those wonderful 0500 calls. A 25-year-old was transported into your emergency department following a collision, and your team identifies multiple ortho injuries, intra-abdominal bleeding, and the patient requires multiple transfusions. Now, while cleaning up, a team member identifies that the patient received 2 incompatible units of blood. The patient developed multi-system failure and died, and you are uncertain, and the reports to you are uncertain, that if the transfusion error has contributed to the adverse outcome, but you know that the patient got 2 incompatible units of blood. Now, the nurse who administered the blood is a very experienced individual. Now, it turns out that the emergency department was busy. The trauma service was actually engaged in treating multiple victims from the accidents, and policy directs personnel to confirm 2 identifiers before administering any blood product. And you know that there was a close call just a year earlier, and at that time the decision was made that all ED and emergency room personnel would be retrained. Now, your quality and risk teams are going to review records, they're going to schedule interviews, and your policy clearly directs that a root cause analysis and event analysis would be attended by all involved personnel. And you have other thoughts as someone in a leadership position. I wonder what's been shared with the families. We think about our professional duty. You also think about your team, the nurses, physicians, and others who were involved in the event, and understand that such an occurrence will have an impact upon their well-being, and you make a mental note to alert your wellness program director because that is an essential part of who you are. But the question all of us have is, while we're evaluating this particular event, how in the world do we prevent? How do we learn? How do we understand the factors that set individuals up? And how do we maintain human accountability as we work through this particular event? You know, I know that hospitals and medical groups are highly complex. And humans are highly complex and subject to fatigue and stresses and circumstances at home, etc., that impact the way that we function in our systems. And this notion of balancing systems and individual accountability is central to the operation of a safety, fair, and just culture. And so I'm going to call you to think about this decision-making balance beam that we really face all the time. So as you think about the issues of accountability, we've got to look both on the system side, but it must be balanced by a willingness to look at the performance of individuals. And I don't want us to think that this is not doable because it is, because there are great examples of organizations all over the country that really have done some great things in this process of balance and have achieved the kind of care that we want for those that we serve. But when you look at programs that have been effective, I think that there are 6 elements that I want you to constantly think about. Do I have these in my system? Do I have these as I'm ready to roll out a new initiative? Because I believe that these elements promote success in pursuit of safety, in creating the right balance. And that is, number 1, a clear leadership commitment to deal with everyone and all systems fairly. This occurs because we clearly have articulated goals to make those we serve our highest priority. 3, we have to be willing to change work patterns in a way that creates teamwork and teams that communicate with each other and have a role in participating in decision making. When we see unnecessary variation in care, we must deal with it. But by unnecessary variation in care, I mean not only those circumstances where we're not practicing evidence-based medicine, but circumstances where human behavior demonstrates unnecessary variation, either in terms of making families unhappy or non-adherence with standard expectations of team membership. We must have measures, because at the end of the day, professionals want feedback, but we want good measures to let us know how we're doing. And then one of the things that I feel so strongly about is that we need a stepwise, graduated intervention process for individuals who are exhibiting what I call non-teamwork promoting behavior. You see in parentheses this notion of disruptive, and that's a term, but that's a fighting term, and what we're trying to do is build the right kind of culture. So my focus is on this notion of non-teamwork promoting. Now, as you pursue safety, there are 4 foundational elements, and again, these repeat from those elements that I mentioned before that are associated with success. Shared values and goals, effective leadership that is actually modeled, and this leadership goes down to the unit level. Everything we can do to ensure teamwork, and a critical element of that is respect for all team members, and we pursue this notion of a safety culture where we are willing to deal with unsafe systems, where we are willing to deal with humans, whoever they may be within the organization. And all of these principles mutually reinforce to make medicine kinder and safer. I want to mention a couple of the prerequisites that you must have if you're going to seek to bring this right balance. I can't say enough about this notion of shared values and goals for all team members. Several years ago at Vanderbilt, we went through a process that I frankly thought was silly at the time, in which we did art exercises to define who are we? What are our values? When you think about Vanderbilt's Medical Center, what comes to mind? Well, this is clearly not Shakespearean, but at the end of the day, we had nearly 900 team members throughout the organization who engaged in this artwork in groups of 20, and from that we distill this credo. And these kinds of statements of value are so important about laying the foundation in recruiting, but they're equally important when individuals fail or appear to fail to follow these principles. It serves as a starting point for feedback conversation. And you see our credo: I serve my highest priority, I communicate effectively, I conduct myself professionally, I respect privacy and confidentiality, I have a sense of ownership, I am committed to my colleagues. But I want you to note that these issues embody the principles of professionalism, but they are also framed in the I word. And I think that it's so important that when you think about defining your core values, you do it in terms of I. It's not we, it's me. In addition, I can't say enough about the need for clear leadership commitment, and this is so hard, because at the end of the day, we have to understand our source of authority for holding individuals accountable. And authority derives from the someone's organization role, policy directives, hospital and medical staff bylaws, and it is amazing to me how often leaders are actually unaware and have never reviewed what their policies are and their source of authority and what they can and cannot do. Leaders understand the mission and credo. Leaders establish and follow processes that are transparent and driven by data. Leaders understand their own accountability to those they serve, which includes the patients that walk in the door, and to other team members within the organization. But in my mind, leadership means someone who will not blink when there is a violation of expected behavior, and that individual is a huge RVU producer or has some, for some reason, special status. Values and leadership model allow teams to flourish. The next challenge that I think that I would always have you think about, how do you know, or do you even know, when an event or near miss occurs within your environment? And will your team members actually report? We've had a major effort at Vanderbilt over the last couple of years for timely event reporting, and it is amazing how effective a process of sharing can be and what you can do to transform a culture. One of the things that I like to do when I'm working with organizations is I ask individuals about what they think represents their team members' willingness to report or refer episodes of disruptive behavior or simply other events within the environment. And this is from a site that I worked with not long ago. And what you see within any organization, there are many individuals that feel that they can report, but others are hesitant. And one of the things that I will ask you to think about within your own culture is, why is it that individuals may hesitate to report an event or a near miss or an episode where someone does not function in a way that is consistent with your credo? Team members will report. A foundation for balancing systems and human accountability is a willingness for team members to report, and individuals will report when there's psychological safety, when there is a belief that the organization will both review and act to address unsafe systems and non-teamwork promoting behavior. Now, the other thing you've got to do is have a robust system of surveillance. And the elements of your surveillance system include the notion of executive walkarounds. I think that Alan Frankel has done such a great job telling us why that's so important about visibility of leadership. Just walking around sends a very clear message. It allows leaders to observe, to listen, to ask questions, and they need to be done in a very precise way, and you'll see an article that will define that within the associated reading. Team member reports to either electronic events, to risk management or quality, and you can count on individuals in the right culture to report incidents, events, near misses, but they should also be encouraged to report episodes that they perceive represent unprofessional, non-teamwork promoting behavior, observed or suspected violations of regulatory requirements, etc. But these represent some of the sources of your data, but there are other sources of data that are important. We know how important safety culture surveys are to send a message, but also to give teams an opportunity to debrief about their results. And I find that that often will initiate very healthy discussions. Patients are observers of events. We spend lots of time at Vanderbilt listening to patients and their spontaneous complaints because they have experiential knowledge of the health system. They observe our function, and as I often like to say, they often are the first individuals to identify a disturbance in the force. And when they do, we want to hear, record, and look at that data on a regular basis. And then there is great work now in terms of looking at this notion of trigger tools and how they give us an opportunity to go back and review and again identify unsafe systems and individuals who may not be functioning at the level that we would expect. Now, the other critical question is, how do you review event reports? So data in, does anyone do anything with it? And so within our environment, certainly risk management reviews events where we think that we have not delivered the best care and someone has been harmed or may have been harmed. Having a defined process by our quality section here at Vanderbilt to do what we call event analysis, requiring all participants to be physically present. You don't do this for the doctor. You do this in partnership. We've created a process of morbidity, mortality, and improvement conferences by practice under our quality umbrella. And safety organizations also then need to be committed to some kind of discipline process. And I don't care what process you use to tease apart and then think about how we are going to re-engineer our systems of care. One thing that we're particularly proud of at Vanderbilt is our morbidity, mortality, and improvement conferences, which we started at pediatrics but has extended through the entire environment now. And every one of our departments, units conduct these, and these are multidisciplinary. I want to see hospital administrators, nursing professionals, pharmacy. Everybody who's a part of the healthcare team needs to be in the room. And one of the things that we always do is that we remind individuals that in the MM&I process, we want to take the highest definition possible. And so we define an error as an occasion in which a planned sequence or mental or physical activity fails to achieve its intended outcome using reason's definition. And so what we are committed to is delivering the best care possible. So when we look at these cases, it's not about shame and blame. It is how collectively could we have delivered care that, as we say in Tennessee, could have been more better. In addition, unfortunately, we have to remind humans that what is said here stays here, and it is very critical to maintaining the culture that we don't go around talking about each other, but we talk directly and in appropriate formats. Now, we happen to use an Ichikawa fishbone diagram, and this is actually from one of our MM&Is, and the moderator is trained how to elicit from the audience all the different factors that may have contributed to a particular adverse event or near miss, and we actually find that we can roll these up looking for common themes. And then what we do, which I think is an issue of human accountability, we develop a working action plan, and we actually show these at every subsequent MM&I as a way to remind people to, in a kind way, get their work done. Now, the other thing that is very important in your role is to remind leadership that this process is costly, but a very worthwhile investment. And so you cannot run a vigorous safety and quality program without adequate resources, and you sure can't deal with the issues of balancing human and personal and systems accountability without funds to support dedicated personnel to tease apart cases, cost of training leaders because they have to understand how to moderate and act, the cost of surveillance systems so that you know what's going on within your organization, appropriate informatics and biostatistics support, and then you've got to have experts who understand re-engineering at times our defective systems, and then you most certainly have to be able to constantly go in and remind your chief financial officer how wise this activity is. Two other tools that are essential in terms of balance is Reason's Unsafe Acts algorithm, and then something that we call a promoting professionalism pyramid. So it's important to have a defined way that when you're going to tease apart a case, just like our case of our missed transfusions, we want to be asking these same questions routinely. Did the team member intend to cause harm? Did the team member come to work impaired? Did the team member knowingly and unreasonably increase risk? Would another team member in the same situation act in a similar manner? These questions need to be applied every time there is a question of human performance. But then that algorithm initiates the process. But what then do you do with your conclusions? And so one of the things that we do is we use this accountability pyramid that you see to help us create the right, appropriate, and measured response to those circumstances in which there are problems with human performance. Now, note again that the base of this pyramid is on the fact that the vast majority of professionals, there are no issues. We come to work, we do an outstanding job. And one of the ways that we honor those individuals is a willingness to address those circumstances when occasionally we stub our toe or do not perform in a way that is consistent with supporting the team. So in that circumstance, you see that the first question we ask are whether these events will generate a mandated review, either because they represent some human behavior that we can't tolerate, inappropriate sexual contact, coming to work impaired, issues of creating situations of discrimination or abuse. But there are other kinds of egregious events where individuals choose not to follow clearly defined policies that are safe. And in that circumstance, we have to escalate those up beyond simply an informal intervention. But most of the slips and lapses that we have need to simply be dealt with in a very non-judgmental, respectful way, and we call those simply having a cup of coffee. I don't like the language that suggests fighting, and so these are not critical or crucial conversations. They're simply the things that we do as a part of a safety culture, and I may need to sit down and simply share a cup of coffee with you. Now, sometimes we've been there before, or the event is significant enough that we've got to bump it up. As Emerald, the chef, says, we've got to kick it up a notch. And in that circumstance, I'm going to simply make you aware that there appears to be a pattern, or that this event has such a safety implication that I need to make you aware, but I still am going to respect you as a professional and have the full expectation that you are going to self-correct in whatever things you need to do to reduce the probability of recurrence. Now, in most circumstances, as the pyramid illustrates, most individuals will respond in this when they're dealt with respect. But if individuals are unable or unwilling to respond, or if the event is particularly egregious, or there's a mandated event, then we have to be directive, and we can't be fearful to do that. But this pyramid allows you to figure how you are going to match the conversation and the right intervention with the data that you're dealing with. But does any of this work? Well, I'm biased because this process of this pyramid has grown out of some research that I've been involved in the last 15 years, in which we have sought to identify those physicians that get more than their fair share of malpractice claims. These individuals are reliably identified by a process in which you take families' unsolicited patient complaints, you distill down the wheat from the chaff, and it has enabled us to reliably identify those physicians who generate more than their fair share of complaints and far more than their fair share of malpractice claims. This is from two of our papers that simply illustrate the similar pattern of complaint distribution, whether we're in a regional medical center in central Missouri or whether we're in an academic medical center where I'm sitting here today. Humans are humans, and even though we argue that we're terminally unique, we really are not. We have learned to take those physicians who are at the top 5% of that list, and using this pyramid, these individuals generate a pattern of patient dissatisfaction. And so using the pyramid, we send trained peer messengers to simply sit down to make those colleagues aware. And we do it by giving them a heads up, giving them the classic "you are here" figure, telling them the kinds of things that families are saying about them, but we remind them that we trust them as professionals. We know that they are going to bond with their data. They are going to reflect on whatever it is within their practice that generates unnecessary malpractice risk, and we are sure they're going to act to address the problem. That process, that awareness intervention, now has been done in over 2,000 high-risk physicians nationally. These data are from the institutions that we've been working with the longest, but if you look down to the bottom of this slide, you'll see that just over 70% of individuals who receive a peer-delivered intervention visit, we're not telling them what to do, we're not being judgmental, but using that pyramid, we simply are appealing to them to self-correct. and I continue to be reinforced at what a wonderful job professionals will do if we simply will treat them by respect. We don't play gotcha. We're not out there trying to be judgmental. We simply are reminding individuals of the importance of teamwork and respect, and they'll do it. Now, again, I'm not naive, and you will see from this data that 20% do not get any better and require Plan B, but the pyramid allows you then to go up and be very directive with what these individuals have to do. And unfortunately, there are some individuals who, for whatever reason, are unable or unwilling, even in that level, to respond. And at that point, you simply have a circumstance where they are not going to be a good fit for your team. Now, let's go back and close out a review of the transfusion case using the process of becoming aware the event was reported, the fact that the organization was committed to doing an event analysis to tease apart and look both at systems issues as well as individual issues within the particular case. So it turns out that the incompatible units were intended for a second victim. Unfortunately, all trauma blood was stored in the same location. Blood had been sent inappropriately to the ED instead of the OR, where the real patient whose blood got mistransfused. They were in one location. Our systems didn't speak to each other. During the frenzy of activity, a nurse was dispatched for trauma blood, and by chance, he pulled 2 units again, intended for someone who was in the OR. As the nurse approached the patient bedside, he came under a barrage of expletives from a particular surgeon about getting the blank blood into the patient. Now, the nurse asserted in follow-up interviews that I tried once to state that I was simply following procedure to confirm 2 identifiers, but as the barrage continued, the nurse felt pressured to go ahead because, again, this particular locker is only for trauma blood. Now, another team member, a witness, recognized the high-risk situation, but reflected, I just didn't speak up. Besides, if I spoke up, I was concerned that I would also come under assault. So as we go back to that balance beam, it's clear that there were systems issues that created an increased probability that a patient got the wrong blood. But it's also clear that there was human involvement in this particular case, and fairness directs that we deal with both challenges. So as we think about the issues of systems fixes, we've got to create a better interface between the admitting and lab systems, and so here's a perfect example where 2 systems didn't speak to each other, and that in itself created an increased probability of an error. In addition, it was clear that in that hectic environment, blood had been delivered mistakenly to the ED, and because all blood that comes to the ED is trauma blood, it simply was placed in the same locker. And then it was also clear that the team at that particular moment was overwhelmed, and so how do we identify triggers to recruit help when demand escalates the amount of service that has to be delivered? It is a responsibility of the organization to look and act to create a safer, kinder system. But what about the human accountability within the particular case? And so, in this circumstance, let's talk about how we might use the pyramid in sharing with the parties in the case. And I want us to look first at the nursing professional who was, I'm going to call, the observer. This individual recognized that there was a problem. There was clearly a colleague under verbal assault, but by their own acknowledgement did nothing to speak up or to get help. Now, using Reason's unsafe algorithm, clearly there was no intent to cause harm. There is no evidence that this team member came to work impaired. In a sense, perhaps this notion of being willing to speak up Did the team member knowingly and unreasonably increase risk in interviews? The individual knows that there was an opportunity to act in some way that might have reduced probability. So no evidence of intent to cause harm. There's no history of unsafe previous acts. And you believe that others might have behaved similarly. But, again, by not speaking up, Nurse 2 clearly increased the probability of risk. And so using the pyramid in this circumstance, given the track record, you simply sit down and you have what we call an informal cup of coffee conversation. Your role in that, if you are the appropriate line leader, is simply to report that this event occurred, to let that individual know that it's recognized that there was a missed opportunity, but you deliver the message in a way that is designed to avoid any embarrassment, any humiliation, and the message simply is there was an opportunity, I needed to bring that to your attention and simply share that with you, and to allow the individual to be a professional. Now, Nurse 1, the individual who was involved in administering the incompatible units. Well, they did come directly under assault, verbally, by Surgeon X. Now again, using the unsafe acts algorithm, there was no intent to harm. There was no prior history. The nurse here clearly acknowledged violating a policy, something that he had been trained in and knew was a safeguard. Now, in this circumstance, you don't feel that simply having an informal cup of coffee is sufficient. And so because this is an act that created risk, you take it to the next level up of the pyramid and you decide to have an awareness feedback. And you're going to sit down and allow that nurse to reflect on what happened. Again, the goal is to provide feedback in a way designed to protect other patients and to protect the well-being of your team. In this circumstance with an awareness intervention, you review whatever data you have or the story. You seek the subordinate's view, and you anticipate their potential pushbacks and responses. You invite them to take time to think about ways to address the challenge, issue, pattern, whatever it may be. You always express appreciation. You acknowledge their contributions to the organization. However, it's still important that we understand the way we do things and that we follow those directives. And you always explain that there will be follow-up with any subsequent similar act. And these conversations are always documented. So in the actual meeting, you again affirm with Nurse 1 that he is a valued team member. You review the results of the RCA. You ask him to reflect on the issues. And in the conference itself, he asked for assertiveness coaching as he's concerned that he allowed another team member to intimidate him. This is the sort of self-reflection, the insight that suggests to you that this individual, given the right resources, will be able to be better equipped to be an important, valued member of your team. Now, when Dr. Surgeon yelled, "Get the blood in," does that qualify in your mind as non-teamwork promoting behavior? It does. And so often we've seen non-teamwork promoting behavior expressed in the sort of aggressive approach. You see some artwork done from a conference that we do in which I ask individuals to do these art exercises from their own memory. And this was done by a very influential chief nursing officer of a large system in this country who can remember an event 30 years ago where she came under assault. But this is from our current Vanderbilt professional conduct policy, and one that I would really encourage you to think about. We need to move away from focusing just on throwing, spitting, and cussing, although that is clearly disruptive. But we need to reframe this discussion in terms of teamwork. So what I like to do, in partially paraphrasing Jim Reason's definition of an error, define disruptive behavior as any behavior that adversely affects the ability of the team to achieve its intended outcome. In that circumstance, most certainly throwing, spitting, and cussing qualify. But so does this passive behavior. This was actually done by chairman of surgery at an unnamed institution in Boston, and I asked them to illustrate what they viewed as examples of non-teamwork promoting behavior. And here you see a critical meeting of the Department of Surgery, and you see 3 heads represented in this auditorium. So I want to remind you that disruptive behavior may be throwing, spitting, and cussing, but I find that more often it's passive or passive-aggressive behavior, and may range from anything from failure to document, to do handovers appropriately, to follow evidence-based pathway, and those sorts of things equally destroy teamwork. And it's important that we begin to have more and more focus on this challenge, because we know there are consequences of disruptive professional behavior, from lawsuits to dropping out to voice complaints about us in the neighborhood, to increasing data about the association of disruptive non-teamwork promoting behavior and medical errors. There's an interesting paper that's not in the medical literature done by Phelps. And you see the reference at the bottom of this slide. He calls the paper How, When, and Why Bad Apples Spoil the Barrel. But think about this concept of lesson trust. If you are an experienced ICU nurse and you are performing a complex task, and I have a history of routinely blowing up, and you're focused on that task, but now I walk in the unit, by definition, you must at least remove some of your focus from the task at hand to begin to track me for when I'm going to blow up. These kinds of interactions set the stage for slips and lapses, including a similarity in the case of the bad transfusion, where an individual knows the right thing but is bullied in to failing to observe policy, resulting in this mistransfusion. Our good colleague has pointed out through his interview studies how often members of the team have critical information but just don't seem to share that information with others. So prior to meeting with Surgeon X, you review the results of the RCA. Now, you must be someone who has the authority in this circumstance to sit down. And again, that's why you have to know your policies and where the lines of authority reside. You review other performance behavior data about this particular individual. You see there have been malpractice claims. There's been an apparent pattern of non-teamwork promoting behavior, and you have had in the past an awareness intervention with this particular individual. But unfortunately, you find that this individual fails to self-correct. So again, going back to the pattern, you hope that these single events have been dealt with. You recognized an apparent pattern. An awareness conversation was clearly documented. At this point, there is only one way to go, and that is to go to the next level of providing what we call a guided intervention by an appropriately authorized authority figure. And the guided interventions occur because there is a pattern and no improvement, or a singularly significant event. Now, one of the things that I like to do is to either have the authority figure and the individual co-develop a plan, or sometimes the authority figure just simply has to develop and specify the plan, but the plan must contain defined consequences if it's not followed and it doesn't work within a defined time frame. Now, I've given a list of some resources and tools that may be used, because I find that often individuals don't know the resources available within the community to help with plan development, including, if necessary, a comprehensive mental health evaluation. Back to the pyramid. Again, it's all about recognizing that we have a responsibility to fix defective systems, but we also have a responsibility to deal with the human element. And when we deal with one and not the other, it does not lead to that safety culture. It does not lead to that right or just culture that we all want to be a part of. Components of a safety culture. Safety must be one of the organization's prime goals, if not the prime goal. And within that safety culture, leaders must recognize and model their understanding that adverse or bad outcomes occur because systems and individual contributions. And leaders have got to be committed to a balanced approach. And so in your reading, you'll see several great references that will help you think through how you are going to establish the right balance within your own system of care. Briefly, I want to review just an interesting experiment that we've had recently, because one of our team members who's responsible for delivering data to physicians who don't play well with others happens to be one of our hospital epidemiologists, and he said, gosh, I wonder if we could do this in advance. That is, could we use the pyramid? Could we create a process to take on a problem that has plagued us since Semmelweis recognized that, gosh, professionals ought to wash their hands. So we committed in 2009 that we were going to do a better job with hand hygiene. You can see an embarrassing rate of some 58%. Using what we call a project bundle. And you will see this project bundle referenced, but we think there are three elements of getting ready to do a new project. Do we have the right learning systems? Do we have the right humans? And do we have organizational readiness? So within learning systems, do we have a way to actually measure what we're interested in? Well, within our environment, we can go around and send secret shoppers to observe individuals, whether they foam in or not. We can have embedded observers, but you have to have sources of information to help you know what progress, if any, you're making. And then you have to be able to assess the cost of the problem, because you've got to get your CFO involved. And then you have to be prepared to train individuals how to appropriately foam in, as well as to train individuals how to measure whether people foam in, and you have to have systems to train individuals in the right moment to have a cup of coffee with someone who is not observed following the right pattern of behavior. People, I cannot tell you how much time I spend being sure that we have leadership commitment before we launch a new project. I can't tell you how many times in my career ideas have really made a lot of sense to me, and I started off on a project that just seemed obvious to me, where I did not find that everyone else was on the same page. In Tennessee, I just periodically go around and sit on the front porch and rock, sharing ideas with my colleagues who I must count on to endorse, support, and not blink when someone asserts that the plan doesn't apply to them. It's also important that your board endorse these important initiatives, but what board of trust or directors would ever say that we shouldn't be washing our hands? And then you got to put together the right dedicated project team, and that means individuals that are reasonable, who neither are wimps or, as the Blues Brothers movie would say, I don't want people on a mission from God. They've got to be willing and able, and I don't want token members. I want individuals who understand exactly what's going to be expected of them. And then one of the things that's interesting that I've learned more and more in our effort at Vanderbilt, it takes a project champion, willing and able, no token leaders, but this notion of the X factor, there are individuals out there who can inspire and just get individuals to see the vision. That is so important if you're going to sustain efforts. And then you've got to be sure that you've got organizational readiness, that it aligns with other goals, that we've got a clear plan, and the CFO is willing to write the correct check. With respect to our hand hygiene, we put all of those things into place. We planned it in advance. We checked the boxes, and then we launched. And what I want you to see is, surprise, surprise, as we were doing our assessment, we found that some units were doing really well, and other units, again, as I would say, could do more better. But one of the things we often find is that you just need to make people aware. So using this promoting professionalism pyramid, we've got units now that for some reason have a pattern of hand washing that doesn't seem consistent. So one of the things that we did in this process is create a parallel process where we created letters to send to those medical directors to let them know that for whatever reason, they just didn't seem to be achieving what we had agreed was our goal of exemplary hand hygiene. And one of the things I want you to see, look at these data. The red bar represents where the unit was before we started this awareness process. The pale green represents where they were cumulatively after we had intervened, and the greens represent the most recent month. It is amazing how effective a tiered process can be if individuals understand your level of commitment. And I'm pleased to report, and this is actually, we have even subsequent data to this, and we now are over 90%. We're not where we want to be, but with over 50,000 of these secret shopper observations, we are over 90% with our hand hygiene practices, and we are going to go higher. I want to thank you again for your commitment to safety and making medicine kinder and safer. I want to encourage you to review the literature that is associated with this module, because I think it will provide you the foundation as you think about this challenge of how you balance systems and human accountability in the pursuit of safety and quality. Thank you.